to different congressmen. They're all congratulating us.
Is that an iPhone, sir?
Yeah, it's lucky it is, right?
It's actually a funny moment. That was President Trump interrupted not once, but twice, allegedly by two different congressmen today in the Oval Office by his iPhone ringing. Now, just moments after saying that the 25% tariff he threatened to place on Apple will also apply to other smartphone makers if they don't produce their products here in the U.S. He also turned up the pressure in a major way on the EU, imposing 50% tariffs set to go into effect on June 1st.
I'm not looking for a deal. I mean, we've set the deal. It's at 50%. But again, there is no tariff if they build their plant here. Now, if somebody comes in and wants to build a plant here, I can talk to them about a little bit of a delay. But, while they're building their plant, which is something I think that would be appropriate, maybe.
So what's the potential impact to the U.S. economy? CNN's Matt Egan is at the magic wall.
Yeah, Phil, this would be a major escalation in the president's trade wars. And this definitely caught investors off guard, right? They had been relieved about the fact that trade tensions seemed to be calming down. Now they're heating back up. Just to remind you how we got here, last month the president briefly imposed 20% tariffs on the EU. Then he lowered them to 10% to allow for time for negotiations. Now he's not happy about how those talks are going, and he's threatening a 50% tariff on the EU. Now, just to give you some context here, the EU is America's biggest trading partner, far and away. We're talking about almost $1 trillion worth of imports and exports between the U.S. and the EU last year alone. That's more than with Mexico, more than with Canada. It's actually more than with China and Japan combined. When you look at what the U.S. gets from the EU, we're talking about more than $600 billion worth of goods last year alone. It's not just the BMWs and the Volkswagens from Germany. We're also talking about aircraft, pharmaceutical products, machinery, wine, and other alcoholic beverages. And if you put a 50% tariff on those goods, there's obviously a risk that they're going to get expensive, more expensive, potentially a lot more expensive. That's why economists over at Barclays, they say that they view this threat of a 50% tariff as a negotiating tactic, but they do caution that if these tariffs did go into effect, they would weigh on both GDP growth and they would further boost inflation. So you could have a situation where you have slower growth and higher prices. And we don't know yet exactly how the EU is going to respond, but they've already set in motion potential retaliatory tariffs on more than $100 billion of goods that they buy from the United States. And it's those retaliatory tariffs that could kill U.S. jobs. Now, it's not just the EU that the president is threatening with his favorite weapon. Also, it is one of America's biggest companies, Apple. Apple joining a growing list of U.S. companies that have been attacked by the president so far this year. And the thing Apple has in common with Amazon and Mattel and Walmart is how it's linked to tariffs, right? The president is threatening at least a 25% tariff on Apple unless they move manufacturing back to the United States. But the problem is the cost of labor here in the U.S. is so much higher that this is something that not only Apple couldn't do overnight, right? It would take 5 to 10 years, but it would make the iPhone more expensive, way more expensive. There's estimates out there that if the iPhone was made in the U.S., each one would cost $3,500 a piece, right? That is prohibitively expensive for many Americans, and that's why veteran analyst Dan Ives says that they believe this concept of Apple producing iPhones in the U.S. is a fairy tale, and he says it's one that is not feasible. And look, even if Apple found a way to somehow make it economical, it is not clear at all that they'd be able to find enough workers in the U.S. who have the skills and, frankly, the desire to build iPhones. Back to you, Phil.
Otherwise, straight path. Matt Egan, thanks so much. With me is the U.S. national editor of the Financial Times, Ed Luce, who is also the author of a remarkable new biography. I was going to hold it up. Well, you got a graphic. Zbig, The Life of Zbigniew Brzezinski, America's Power Prophet. I want to talk about that in just a moment. We were already talking about it during the break, but I do want to start with what's going on. I don't know how your Friday morning was. Mine was interrupted by the reignition of a pretty substantial trade threat. Starting with the EU. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said this earlier today. Take a listen.
I would hope that this would light a fire under the EU, because, Bill, I've said before, EU has a collective action problem here. So some of the feedback that I've been getting is that the underlying countries don't even know what the EU is negotiating on their behalf.
Why I wanted to point that out, the president a couple hours later said, I don't want a deal. Mm-hmm. And this is the constant tension that those of us like you covering this, is this a negotiating strategy? Is it to light a fire, like the Treasury Secretary is saying? Or is this the end game? Is this the outcome? What do we think here?
So, I mean, the one thing there that I strongly agree with Secretary Scott Bessent about is there is a collective action problem with the 27 member states. Is different to doing a deal with Saudi Arabia or even the UK, where one government can react quickly. They have to consult a lot of governments. But I suspect when they consult those 27 governments, with one or two exceptions, like Hungary, there's a real digging in of heels here that, you know, we are the largest trading bloc in the world. We are, as in the European Union, and we're not going to be intimidated by these kind of casino hall tactics. This is sort of a game of bluff, and we're not going to lose at this game of bluff. So the EU is not that different, in fact, to China in saying you cannot push us around. We're not the UK, and we're not a Gulf kingdom. So I don't know whether this is the end of, 50%, raising the cost of those $600 billion imports to $900 billion in terms of the cost to the American consumer. I don't know whether Trump thinks this is the end game. I don't think he knows whether it's the end game. He changes his position and is unforecastable. That's the real problem here. You cannot predict what he's going to do.
Real quick, because I do want to move on and spend some time on the book, but what does that do to negotiate? Like when you talk to diplomats or trade teams that are involved in the dozens of negotiations that are ongoing right now, that reality, what does it do?
So, I mean, the one deal that Trump has trumpeted is the UK deal. And if you look at the contents of that deal, there really aren't any. It's sort of a framework with lots of blank placeholders. So even the word deal, let alone agreement means, you've threshed out something that will last for years.
Right.
But the UK breathed a sigh of relief. They felt they had dodged a bullet, but they've gone back to a baseline of 10%, which is not a victory. It's just a worse outcome avoided. So that's not really the model for the EU. It's not really the model for China. It's not really the model for anybody. It's very, very hard to negotiate with a president who can tank the markets with a tweet and without any warning.
It is certainly different than normal diplomatic relations. See what I did? This is a segue through the book, which I was genuine in telling you during the break, and I'm not all the way through it yet, but it's an extraordinary work. And I actually want to ask you, you have access to things people just haven't before. The family didn't ask for anything. Actually, explain what you have access to, because it connects to the Pope in a way that I think is really, really extraordinary.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. I mean, the raw material, the primary material that partly I was given by the family, which is the diaries he kept. He sort of used a dictaphone from the White House back to his home in Virginia every night, spoke in full paragraphs. That first draft of history, these enormous diaries, I got exclusive access to. The correspondence with Pope John Paul II, who, of course, like Brzezinski, came from Poland, which was in Polish, an extraordinary, really historic exchange of letters over many, many years. Brzezinski had P for Pope on his White House phone, so he could get through to the Vatican straight away. And that helped prevent the Soviet invasion of Poland, that relationship. It was a really sort of seminal one, but tons of stuff. The Polish secret police files and the Soviet ones on Brzezinski, I had those translated. All his childhood stuff, you need to get the formative stages for a real biography, those early years.
The reason I ask, it's so timely given we've seen J.D. Vance, Vice President Vance go over, and you start to think, okay, well, is this a thing that's happened before? Yes, it has. And the illustration, the picture you paint here and the stakes and the outcome, which are so dramatic, on some level leaves you a little bit hopeful. I do ask, look, he was a maverick in terms of partisan politics, right?
Yes.
In '88, he didn't endorse the Democrat, if I recall correctly. Is there anybody like him anymore?
He's really unusual. It's one of the reasons I was attracted to doing a biography of him. He was a grand strategist. He was Henry Kissinger's great rival. But unlike Kissinger, he wasn't much of a team player. I mean, he was a very, very independent-minded. He'd argue with Jimmy Carter, the president he served. They'd have stand-up fights. This wasn't a Rubio-Trump relationship, let's put it like that. He wasn't a hawk, he wasn't a dove, he wasn't a realist, he wasn't an idealist. He was a Democrat, but as you point out, he endorsed H.W. Bush over Dukakis in the '88 election, voted for Nixon over McGovern in 1972. He was his own person, and it's quite hard to get ahead in any political capital, including Washington, D.C., if you don't belong to a tribe and stick to that tribe's rules and sort of absorb its memos and then, faithfully regurgitate them. He really, really didn't do that. He was his own person.